If you've ever looked at your investments and thought, brilliant, I've spent years building this up and it still has all the explosive power of a mildly confident houseplant, this video is for you because a lot of people hear phrases like, just keep investing and let compounding do the work. And it sounds nice, but when you're staring at $3,000 or $8,000 or even $17,000 invested, it does not exactly feel like your money is out there performing miracles. It feels more like you are dragging the whole machine uphill yourself, while your portfolio occasionally chips in the financial equivalent of bus fare. And that is why $50,000 matters. Not because $50,000 means you've made it, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, and not because some invisible finance wizard appears in your kitchen and starts applauding, but because this is the point where investing often stops feeling theoretical and starts feeling real. I'm Dan, and if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things with money, but the results still look a bit underwhelming, I want to show you why reaching $50,000 invested changes far more than most people realize. Because the strange thing about building wealth is that the early stages are emotionally brutal. You can be doing everything right for years and still feel like not much is happening. You are contributing regularly. You are saying no to things. You are trying not to behave like your bank card has a personal grudge against your future. And yet, when you check the numbers, it still feels small. That is the part almost nobody prepares you for. The beginning of investing is not hard because the maths is complicated. The beginning is hard because the progress is visually unimpressive. And that creates a dangerous psychological trap. A lot of people quit, slow down, or stop taking it seriously before the process has had enough time and enough capital to become emotionally convincing. That is why $50,000 is such a powerful milestone. It is often the point where your money starts to behave differently enough that you feel the shift, not just understand it on paper. To see why, let me give you two versions of the same investor. Let's call them Ryan and Leah. Ryan is 33, earns a decent salary, and started investing a few years ago. He has been fairly consistent, but he is tired. His portfolio is sitting at around $8,000, then $12,000, then $15,000, and every time the market moves a bit, the gains look fine, nice, technically positive, but not exactly life-altering. He puts in $500, the market gives him $63, then takes back $41, then gives him $112, and emotionally it all feels a bit like trying to fill a swimming pool with a sports bottle. Leah is not wildly different. Similar income, similar age, similar life pressures, but she sticks with it longer. She keeps contributing. She gets through the early boring bit. She reaches $50,000 invested, and now something changes. Not magic, not overnight riches. But the nature of the feedback changes. At $5,000 invested, a good market day is pleasant. At $50,000 invested, a good market day can look like actual money. At $5,000, a 10% annual return is $500. At $50,000, the same 10% is $5,000. That difference is not just numerical, it is psychological. Because one of the biggest problems in personal finance is that people are asked to trust systems long before those systems feel trustworthy. You are told to invest for the long term when, in the short term, it barely feels like anything is happening. And to be fair, your feelings are not entirely irrational. In the early stages, most of the progress really is coming from you. Your discipline, your savings rate, your consistency, your willingness to keep going even when the numbers feel underwhelming. That means the first stretch of investing can feel less like building wealth and more like repeatedly throwing money into a polite but unenthusiastic machine. But around $50,000, the machine starts answering back. That is the first reason everything changes. 1. Your money starts making contributions that you can actually feel. Before this point, most of the account growth tends to come from your deposits. You are the engine. If you invest $500 a month, your own behavior is doing almost all the visible heavy lifting. Market gains matter, but they are usually too small to change your emotional experience of investing. But once you hit $50,000, average market growth starts becoming large enough to notice in ordinary human terms. A 7% annual return on $50,000 is $3,500. A 10% annual return is $5,000. That means in a decent year, your portfolio may grow by an amount that feels like a holiday, several months of rent support, a serious dent in a future house, deposit a big chunk of someone's annual contributions. That is when investing stops looking like an abstract virtue and starts looking like a second source of momentum. Not a second income in the dramatic YouTube thumbnail sense, more like a second push. And that second push matters because it changes your relationship with patience. When the gains are tiny, patience feels blind. When the gains become visible, patience starts to feel intelligent. That shift keeps people in the game. 2. Compounding stops sounding clever and starts looking obvious. This is where a lot of people get caught out. They understand compounding intellectually long before they believe it emotionally. Everyone has heard some version of your money makes money and then that money makes money. Lovely sentence. Very elegant. Almost suspiciously elegant. But when your account is small, compounding feels like one of those ideas that is technically true and emotionally useless. Like being told that drinking more water will change your life when what you really want is for your finances to stop behaving like a collapsing camping chair. At lower balances, compounding is real but subtle. At $50,000, it starts to become visible enough that your brain finally updates its model. You begin to notice that the growth is no longer coming only from fresh effort. Some of it is coming from past effort still working in the background. That is a huge mental turning point, because wealth building gets dramatically easier once you stop feeling like every bit of progress must be manually dragged into existence by your current month's discipline. At that point, past decisions start helping present decisions. And that is one of the quiet luxuries of investing that nobody really talks about. Eventually, your old self starts making life easier for your current self. Not enough to carry you completely, but enough to matter. 3. The emotional volatility starts to make more sense. Now, this one sounds backwards because at $50,000, the swings are bigger too. And bigger swings can be uncomfortable. A 2% drop on $2,000 is annoying. A 2% drop on $50,000 is $1,000. That gets your attention very quickly. But weirdly, this can be helpful, because by the time you've reached $50,000, you have usually had enough time in the market to understand that movement is part of the deal. The ups and downs no longer feel like random personal attacks from the universe. They start to feel like the normal price of admission. More importantly, the scale begins to make the long-term logic clearer. You start to see why keeping money invested matters. You start to understand why panic selling is so expensive. You start to realize that volatility is uncomfortable precisely because the money is now meaningful. That is a grown-up stage of investing. Early on, people often want returns without fluctuation, which is a bit like wanting the gym results without the sweat, or the holiday without the airport, or the takeaway without the faint self-loathing afterwards. At $50,000, you begin to grasp that volatility is not evidence the plan is broken. It is part of the environment the plan was designed for. That understanding creates maturity, and financial maturity is worth more than most people realize. 4. Your identity changes from someone trying to invest to an investor. This might be the biggest shift of all. At lower balances, investing often feels temporary, fragile, experimental. You feel like someone who is trying to be good with money. You feel like someone who is attempting to build wealth. You feel like someone who is dabbling in the right habits and hoping they eventually turn into something meaningful. But at $50,000, the evidence becomes harder to dismiss. You are not just starting. You are not just having a go. You have built something substantial enough that it starts to affect how you see yourself. And identity matters because identity drives behavior. People who see themselves as investors tend to contribute more consistently, react less emotionally to short-term drops, think in longer time horizons, make fewer impulsive decisions, take wealth building more seriously. That does not happen because of some mystical bond between you and a brokerage app. It happens because numbers change beliefs. Once you have $50,000 invested, the story in your head changes from, I should probably sort my finances out, to, I have a real asset base now, and I need to protect and grow it. That is a very different mindset, and different mindsets produce different futures. 5. Progress starts feeding motivation instead of draining it. One of the hardest parts of the first few years is that effort and reward feel badly matched. You sacrifice in the present. You do the responsible thing. You invest instead of spending. And the visible reward often feels small. That mismatch drains motivation. It is the same reason people quit workouts early, quit businesses early, quit content creation early, quit almost anything early. Humans are much better at continuing when the feedback starts becoming visible. At $50,000 invested, the feedback gets stronger. The account begins to move in a way that confirms the process. And once the process starts confirming itself, consistency becomes easier. This is one of the hidden reasons why the early stages of wealth building are so unfair. The people who most need motivation are often in the phase where the evidence is weakest. That is why so many decent earners stay stuck. They are not always lazy. Often they are exhausted from putting in years of effort without getting emotionally convincing proof that the system is working. 50,000 is often where that proof begins. Not perfectly, not every week, not in a straight line, but enough to matter. 6. Time starts working with you, not just against you. When you are living month to month, time often feels like the enemy. Bills come round, rent comes round, renewals come round. Life keeps demanding more before you've fully recovered from the last round. When you start investing, time initially still feels slow. You are waiting, building, contributing, hoping. But once you reach $50,000, time starts behaving differently. Now, a year is not just a period in which you save more money. It is also a period in which your existing money has a serious chance to grow. That changes how you experience time itself. You stop seeing years only as containers for labor. You start seeing them as containers for compounding. And that is a profound shift, because once time becomes an ally, wealth building stops feeling like pure effort and starts feeling like leverage. That is the real dream, by the way. Not just having money. Having leverage. Having some part of your financial life that is no longer entirely dependent on how hard you personally push this month. 7. You start caring more about protecting the system than chasing cleverness. There is another thing that often happens around this milestone. When your portfolio is tiny, you're more vulnerable to distractions. Hot tips, fancy strategies, trying to beat the market, constant tinkering. The seductive idea that the answer must be something more exciting than consistency. But when you have built $50,000 the boring way, you start respecting boring. You begin to realize that the real flex in finance is not cleverness, it is durability. You see that the hardest part was not finding some genius trick. It was contributing regularly, not panicking, and staying in the game long enough for the capital base to become meaningful. That creates a healthier kind of confidence. Less ego, more patience, less drama, more process. And honestly, that alone can save people from years of self-inflicted nonsense. Because a lot of people do not fail to build wealth because they lacked information. They fail because they kept interrupting the process. And the bigger the portfolio gets, the more obvious that becomes. So is $50,000 the magic number? Not literally. There's nothing sacred about it in the mathematical sense. The market does not ring a bell. Your account does not unlock a secret level. Nobody from the investing community turns up at your door with a certificate and a weak cup of coffee. But it is a powerful threshold because it is often the point where three things happen at once. Your money becomes visibly productive. Your identity becomes more stable. Your patience starts getting rewarded in a way you can actually feel. That combination is enormous. It is what turns investing from an act of faith into an experienced reality. And if you are still below that number, that does not mean what you are doing is small. It means you are in the phase almost everyone underestimates. The phase where the habit matters more than the headline result. The phase where consistency looks boring. The phase where most people get frustrated and drift off. The phase where the future is being built quietly enough that it does not yet look impressive. But that phase is not wasted. It is the price of admission. Every investor who reaches the powerful stage has to pass through the deeply unglamorous stage first. That is the deal. And it is worth remembering that the biggest change at $50,000 is not that you suddenly become rich. It is that the relationship between you and your money changes. Before that point, it mostly feels like you are carrying the plan. After that point, the plan starts carrying some of you. That is a huge emotional difference. It lowers friction, it builds belief, it makes future contributions easier, it makes patience feel rational. It turns compounding from a concept into a lived experience. And once that happens, you are no longer just hoping wealth building works. You have evidence. So if you are somewhere in the early stretch right now, a few thousand invested, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, do not underestimate how misleading that stage can feel. Small balances lie to you. They make a powerful process look weak simply because it has not had enough capital or enough time yet. That does not mean the process is broken. It means you are early. And early is frustrating, early is slow, early is visually underwhelming. Early feels a bit like trying to grow an oak tree in public while everyone walks past asking why it still looks like a stick. But if you keep going, there comes a point where the stick starts looking suspiciously like a tree. For a lot of people, $50,000 is that point. If this video felt a bit too familiar, let me know in the comments where you are in the journey. Still in the early frustrating stage, or starting to feel that shift already? And subscribe if you want more videos like this on money, psychology, and building wealth without pretending the hard part is just maths.